One of the great personalities at the Jewish Theological Seminary when I was a student there uh, in the late 70s was a professor named David Weiss Halivni, who grew up in Hungary and was a Holocaust survivor. He was a Talmud professor there. And then he left the seminary and went to Columbia, where he continued teaching. And then he made Aliyah recently, some years ago. And last year he won the Israel Prize for Talmud, one of the most distinguished prizes Israel offers. Truly one of the great teachers and Jewish scholars of the last century, a brilliant mind and a beautiful soul. He has grandchildren in a local school, and he came to visit, and they talked him into giving a lecture on Holocaust theology, which I just returned from. Bought his book, which I highly recommend, Breaking the Tablets, paperback, David Weiss Halivni, Halivni. And I just wanted to give you, of course, I hope I got it right, some of the basic points that he was making. He began by saying that religious Jews mourn for Tisha B'Av, the day that we mourn the destruction of the first temple destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and the second temple destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, which were destroyed on the same day, the 9th of Av. We call it Tisha B'Av. We mourn, sit on the ground, and he said he remembers his grandfather sitting on the ground and crying. It's something about happened 2,000 years ago, and supposedly Napoleon saw once a Tisha B'Av service and said, if these Jewish people mourn and cry over something that happened 2,000 years ago, they have a future. So he said, but I don't see people so engaged emotionally in remembering the Holocaust. And I wonder, 1,000 years from now, will the Jewish people remember Holocaust in the same way? And then his next point was that the destruction of the temple, 1 and 2, is nothing compared to the Holocaust. Not that it's nothing, it's significant, but compared to the Holocaust, it wasn't. It was in kind a very different thing. And he gave many examples and many arguments. But for example, he said the Babylonians weren't racist. They weren't interested in destroying the Jewish people, the seed of Judaism. They fought the rebels, and then they took the Jews back to Babylonia. And he said Professor Bickerman has demonstrated that Jews lived very well in Babylonia, lived in nice houses. And so too with the Romans, who destroyed the Second Temple in 70 and then continued to fight Jewish rebellions and quashed the rebellion in 132 to 136. With the Common Era, again, they weren't racist. They weren't out to destroy the seed of Judaism. They fought the rebels. They basically wanted money and soldiers. They weren't out to destroy Judaism. The Nazis were out to destroy Judaism. And the difference between gassing 1.4 million children and the destruction of the temples just doesn't compare. It's not the same. He talked about having many conversations with Rabbi Eliezer Berkovitz, who was a teacher of mine here in Chicago. I went to Chicago Jewish High School when I went to High School of Jewish Studies in Chicago when I was in high school. Rabbi Berkovitz wrote a book called Faith After the Holocaust, and if I remember correctly, in that book, he talked about how Jews have an historic way of dealing with destruction through the temples that were destroyed, and the Holocaust is similar. And I think this is a very sharp contrast, if I remember that correctly, with his point of view. And they said they're good friends. They talked all the time. Point number 2 he made is that he does not believe in any way that you can say the Holocaust is a result of sin. He said it's obscene to say that. And he's responding to, for example, Satmar Hasidim, who say, well, it was the Zionists who caused the Holocaust because God was punishing the Jews for Zionism. Or the others who say, well, it was the Haskalah, the Enlightenment, where Jews were abandoning Jewish ritual. He said, when you study it theologically, when you study it theologically, you see the doctrine of punishment for sin is related to individual sin, not the collective Jewish people. And so you can't say that this is a result of the sin of the Jewish people. He was asked a question about Elie Wiesel, and he said he just came back from a conference celebrating Elie Wiesel's 80th birthday. They're very close. Elie Wiesel's main question is, where was man, human beings, in the Holocaust? And Professor Halivni's question is, where was God in the Holocaust? He made some other points. There's a biblical doctrine of Hester Panim. We just had the Torah reading in Deuteronomy recently. The absence of God, God hiding God's face. He said, again, that is about sin, and so you really can't bring that into the Holocaust discussion. Then somebody said, well, doesn't the celebration about the state of Israel mitigate somewhat the pain and suffering of the Holocaust? And he said, even the great achievement of the state of Israel doesn't justify or doesn't lessen the pain of 1.4 million children being gassed and 6 million Jews being killed. Then he had an interesting concept. He said that prayer after Auschwitz is different than prayer before Auschwitz. That prayer before Auschwitz was kind of basic prayer that we understand. Prayer after Auschwitz is, God, don't abdicate. Don't leave the world. Don't stop interacting with us. He also said there is two theologically significant revelations in Judaism. The revelation at Sinai, where God is, that's revelation in God's presence in the world, and the revelation at Auschwitz, where God is absent in the world, revelation in God's absence. Kind of very interesting ideas here. And then he told a story that he tells in one of his books about a person challenging God about the Holocaust, and God says, if you don't like the way I run the world, then I'll return it to tohu vavohu, which is the beginning of creation, where it's void and formless. And then the person kind of turns away, and then he looks back, and God is crying, a great tear. That God suffered. I am with you in your distress, it says in the Bible. God suffered with us in this deep pain. So that was some of Rabbi Halivni's comments about the Holocaust, but the main points that I took away from this were, first, the Holocaust is in kind different than any other tragedy in Jewish history or in the world. The desire to destroy the Jewish seed, the 6 million Jews being killed. And secondly, that it's not about sin. Those are two kind of very controversial points that he made in this lecture that are worth pondering.